Welcome to the Alternative Investing Doctor podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Keith Grosshans, and today I'm breaking down the exact math on how much capital you need to buy back your time as a physician. Now, fair warning, this episode involves some calculations and visual breakdowns that are much easier to follow along with the video version. If you're on Spotify, you can actually watch this right here in the app, or you can find it on my YouTube channel. But if you're listening, don't worry. I'll walk you through all the numbers clearly. Let's dive into how the same money that you're putting into your investment accounts each year could buy you your freedom in just 7 years instead of 30.
What if the same $50,000 you're putting into investment accounts could buy you your freedom in just 11 years instead of 30? I'm Dr. Keith Grosshans, and I'm on the same journey, building note income to eventually reduce my clinical hours. Today, I'm going to show you the exact math on how much capital you need to buy back your time. Let me show you something that could change everything.
So then let's consider the scenario of Dr. Smith. So Dr. Smith is working in a clinical setting as a 1.0 FTE, making $300K annually. Now in an outpatient setting, this might be somewhere from 36 to 42 hours actually seeing patients each week. And say Dr. Smith is getting a little bit burned out and is looking at ways to reduce that clinical time, right? So maybe Dr. Smith wants to go from a 1.0 over to a 0.75 FTE, right? So a 25% reduction of clinical hours. Now to do that, Dr. Smith needs to find a way to replace 25% of this income. So the issue with clinical income is you're not making money if you're not seeing patients, right? So clinical income equals hours in clinic. And this is a recipe for burnout, right? So clinical hours equals burnout risk. So let's talk about how we can go ahead and replace some of this income by using mortgage notes. So if we're looking to reduce to a 0.75 FTE, that's going to mean that we're going to have the following breakdown, right? So 225,000 will be coming from clinical. And then we're going to need to make up another 75,000 from portfolio or passive income if we want to replace that lost income from the FTE deduction or reduction. So that's going to still keep us at our 300K total that we were starting out with. Now this allows you to, again, be flexible, reduce your clinical hours without having to quit entirely. So kind of dictating your own terms of how you want to produce your income. Now, this 75,000 is actually not 100% accurate because we're neglecting payroll taxes, right? So if you're making that 300K, this is all susceptible to payroll taxes. So the first 176K or so is subject to your FICA or Social Security taxes. And then all of this 300,000 is subject to Medicare taxes. So that can actually make a bit of a difference because when you switch over this 75,000 here to note income, that is not actually susceptible to payroll taxes. So that gives you a little bit of an advantage starting out. You don't actually need to replace that full 75,000. It's a bit lower than that. So if we actually calculate what that works out to, it comes out to $73,913 instead of the full $75,000. So that gives you a little $1,087 head start right here. So not too bad, doesn't make a huge difference, but it is a small little step forward for you here. So then why do notes work pretty well for busy physicians? So one advantage here is that mortgage notes consist of monthly principal and interest payments, P&I. And what that is immediate cash flow. So you're not waiting on a quarterly distribution like you might be seeing in apartment syndications. You're not waiting on appreciation like you might be seeing from rental properties. So it's immediate, so there's no waiting involved here. You can spend it as soon as you get it each month. The other benefit, of course, is you're becoming the bank. So you become the bank. And you're not dealing with all the hassles of rental real estate that we have talked about in other videos. Now, for the purposes of the discussion today, I'm using a fairly conservative 8% yield, which is pretty typical for what you can get out in the market right now. You might find some deals with higher yields, but a good starting point would be an 8% yield. So in this situation, if you did the math on that, you'd look at, okay, well, I need to replace $73,913 you just told me. So we divide that by 8% yield. And what does that give us? Well, that's going to show up with a fairly high number here, right? You're going to find that, ooh, I'm going to need almost $1 million invested to replace that income. But that's actually too simple because, again, we talked about over here, we're getting both principal and interest in each month. So this would be accounting only for the interest or profit. So actually, if we invest in a $50,000 note, say we bought a partial note at an 8% yield, and we did a 60-month term on that. The actual monthly cash payment we'd be getting, P&I, would be about $1,014 a month. And that comes out to just over $12,000 annually. And that's actual cash that you can use or spend today. So otherwise, if you do your math, maybe you're only making $96 an hour. Maybe you're somewhere around $150 an hour if you actually run the numbers on your clinical time versus your compensation. So in this situation over here, your money is working for you without you directly trading your time, and that's going to help you buy back some of this time over here. So for the purposes of this discussion, we'll look at 3 different pathways or approaches to getting to that financial freedom, or at least in this case, getting to that reduction of your clinical hours, right? So we're looking at replacing that $75,000 of clinical income, which, as we previously discussed, is only going to end up being a little bit under $74,000 when we take into account some of the differences in the taxation with the payroll taxes. So we're going to break that down between different annual investments that you could implement and see how long that's going to take to achieve this clinical hours reduction. So we have 3 pathways we're going to look at today. So we've got a conservative pathway, more of a moderate pathway, and then what could be considered a little bit more of an aggressive pathway. So on the conservative path, we're looking at investing $25,000 annually. This is probably feasible for a lot of people. It's pretty close to what you could do if you were doing the conventional approach of maxing out your 401k, but the benefit here is you control it, right? So you get to decide what to do with this money, and you get to actually take those payments each month and use them. Now this is going to take a little bit longer to achieve the goal. It's going to be a total of 13 years to get to the goal, and you'll actually need to invest about $325,000 to achieve that reduction of 25% of your clinical hours. The moderate path is going to take about a $50,000 annual investment. If you break that down monthly, that's a little bit over $4,000 per month. And this is actually going to substantially reduce your timeline down to only 7 years. slightly more than half of the time it would take to get to the same goal using that $25,000 each year. And this might be what you're already spending maybe on, luxury car payments or other expenses. So it is potentially feasible to find yourself in this category if you're able to control your expenses and have enough side income to invest. This would be kind of the recommended pathway, as it strikes a good balance between being feasible or achievable and not being super aggressive, which might require some significant spending cuts or decreases in some of your lifestyle, right? So that brings us over to our aggressive path, where you're going to be putting in $100,000 each year. Now, this is going to really reduce your timeline. You could get this done in 4 years using this approach, with a little bit more invested here, total $400,000. And this would be the approach if you really are getting burned out and really want to buy back your time as soon as possible. This is going to get you to that goal of reducing your hours the quickest. But again, this might require the most sacrifices of current lifestyle. You might have to significantly reduce your expenses or forego things like vacations to get here. But if you can do it, this would be a pretty good approach to getting yourself on that pathway to clinical hours reduction the quickest. And with all of these, we're using the same basic approach that I was discussing on the previous page. So we're going to be using notes that are going to be about $50,000 invested at an 8% yield. So this is what that money would look like. And for the purposes of these calculations, we were using 60-month terms on these. So these could be partial notes or buying notes that are close to maturity. The reason being is that if you're buying shorter term notes, they actually do produce a little bit more cash flow each month, as opposed to if you were buying longer dated notes, like notes with 30-year terms remaining on them. So as we showed on the last slide, higher annual investments will significantly reduce the timeline needed to achieve these goals. And then doubling the investment, as I showed you, going from that $25K to $50K, pretty much is going to halve your investment timeline. Certainly this is a strategy that can work. It just depends on how much you're able to invest and how quickly you want to get to the goals that you have set for yourself. And as I mentioned, all paths in these scenarios, we use an 8% yield, which is a relatively conservative yield that is very achievable in today's market. And of course, all of these are producing principal and interest payments, which are immediate cash flow that you can spend today. Now, it's important to keep in mind, if you are starting with a $300,000 annual income and investing a certain percentage of that to achieve these goals, as you start making note income, you're going to want to make sure that a certain percentage of that note income is also being reinvested. You want to keep the actual percentage of income invested consistent to make sure that you're able to achieve these goals.
The reality here is that I'm showing you conservative 8% yields on secured real estate debt. I'm not showing you any leverage tricks or any get-rich-quick promises today. I'm just showing you the math on buying back your most valuable asset, which is your time. This strategy works because notes pay monthly principal and interest, which is immediate cash flow that you can spend just like your clinical income. I'm currently on this exact journey myself. I'm building my note income so that I can eventually reduce my clinical hours. The question really isn't whether this works, it's just whether you'll start and when.
So there you have it. The math behind buying back 25% of your clinical hours using mortgage notes. Remember, this is conservative 8% yield math. No leverage tricks or get-rich-quick promises. Just the numbers on buying back your most valuable asset, which is your time. If you want to see the visual breakdown of these calculations, definitely check out the video version on Spotify or YouTube. And if you found this helpful, I'd love to hear about your own journey toward financial independence. You can find all my content at alternativeinvestingdoctor.com. Until next time, this is the Alternative Investing Doctor. Keep building that portfolio income, and I'll talk to you soon.